By design, an awful lot of Survivor-like games are very similar, because it's you against increasing waves of enemies, against the odds, trying to survive, overcome them by upgrading your stats and going into battle. Cats vs Cthulhu avoids an awful lot of the usual trappings of a Survivor-like game by having a unique control scheme, some interesting nifty mechanics with its upgrades, and a different approach to weapons and just in general how you go about doing things in this game. So it doesn't really feel like a Survivor-like game half the time you play it, but it definitely has all the tropes of it when you dive underneath the bonnet. So, the first thing I want to talk about is that Cats vs Cthulhu doesn't allow you to control your character directly. Instead, you use a cat paw, almost like a Catapult pinball game, where you've got a giant cat boulder that you want to push around the screen and smash into other enemies to kill them. This only works at the very beginning of the game though, but it is your only source of attacking in wave 1 of 13, because you'll be going through 13 waves in the main version of the game to try and survive them. Now, your cat comes with certain stats that affect how the physics of your cat gets pushed around the screen with your paw. The first thing is your paw strength, which will determine how much of an oomph you can get behind yourself. But your cat also has size and mass, and so if your cat is fat and your paw strength is low, it won't get pushed very far, and that leaves you open to being overwhelmed by lots of Cthulhu's devils coming at you. But similarly, if you make your cat quite small and light, but your paw is very, very powerful, you can then end up pinballing around the screen and it's very difficult to control. And what looks like I'll roll out of the way to survive ends up you rolling into trouble elsewhere. And so you have to balance off those stats. You do this by collecting the stars that are dropped from the enemies when they die, but then spending them in the shop upgrades in between each wave. And the shop here has two distinct sections. The first section is all around clothing for your cat, which you can see on display as you roll around. And these are things like putting on extra suits, which increase your mass and size but might give you health. Or it could be something that gives you some regenerative health traits, but again might slow you down or reduce down your attack damage. And quite a lot of the clothings that you get in this game give you like 2 step forwards, 1 step back. So it's really easy to make very awkward cats that are powerful in one thing but terrible in all of the other things. And actually it's really difficult to survive the game in that, because you need to have an element of control and predictability about what your cat's going to do as it bounces around the screen. But it's fun to have the challenge, and it's very much up to you to do that as you spend your stars. The weapons are split into melee and range, and there's a real distinction and nothing in between. But the unique thing around this is how weapons are treated in the game. You don't upgrade any weapons at all in Cats vs Cthulhu. Instead, each cat has a unique amount of weapon slots. So it might be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And once you've bought these very cheap weapons to fill out all of these slots, they'll kind of spin around the cat in the game, and obviously range will pick off the far away ones, melee up close. But when you then want to buy a 6th weapon, you don't sell anything that's off of your current range. You consume it through something called a love injection. And each weapon has its own unique stats for what it actually delivers out on the battlefield, but it also has what happens when it's injected into the cat. And so it might be that it increases health, or it might be that it increases attack damage, or attack range, or attack speed. Or it could be that it increases some health but also makes the cat fatter as well. And so part of the choice of when you're picking weapons is about that love injection element, because some of the more expensive weapons that are more powerful often come at a cost that when you then inject it will mean that the size and the mass of your cat gets fatter and fatter as it gobbles it up. And so there is definitely a risk versus reward. And so you might go in for some of those beefier stats around increasing some of your attack, but also comes with a problem with mass and making yourself fat. And then that means that with the clothing you'll be trying to either get rid of the fat or increase your paw strength to kind of counteract it. And it's a real juggling act balance, and it's just a really unique way, I think, of doing weapons and upgrades and stats as a whole, because you never feel like you've made a wrong choice in Cats vs Cthulhu, because whenever you then consume something, it's adding to your stats constantly over time. So it's not like you go into a skill tree and end up at a dead end. You're making informed choices about, well, if I'm going to buy that, I know I'm going to have to deal with these minuses but these pluses later. But ultimately, I am still stepping in the right direction somewhere. I found this really, really interesting, and I particularly liked it when I started unlocking other cats through collectible cardboard boxes that you get just by playing the game. And all of these cats have different stats on them that remind me very much about how Brotato goes about lots of different versions of the same game that play very differently. And the reason why it plays out very differently in Cats vs Cthulhu is back to that I've only got one weapon slot, for example. Or I've got 5, but I can only pick up balls of wool, so I'm constantly a ranged attack one, for example. The last thing to talk about in this game is Rainbow Power. Oh yes. And this is your special ability. But what's interesting about this is that it's charged by your movement around the levels. So it encourages you to be chaotic by trying to fling yourself around the level's arena as much and as fast as possible to charge your rainbow attack, which then sparks either like massive bombs everywhere or like ghosts of yourself flying out from your centre. It's different for some of the different cats as you unlock them. And so it encourages you to think on your feet, be on your feet, but because you're quite often having to do that anyway, it pays to invest in keeping your rainbow power as strong as possible, for example, or going on for as long as possible so you can get the most bang for your buck out of it. I really enjoyed Cats vs Cthulhu. It took me a little while to click and get used to it, and it's because I was being far too unstrategic around where I was pinging myself. And so if you do pick up this game, what I'll say is that the longer you hold down the mouse, it does go into slow motion, and whilst the world is still moving on around you, it does mean that you can pause and have a little bit more of a lineup of where you want to send your cat as you go, rather than me going a little bit over the top and hyperactive and just like clicking it and sending it flying everywhere, because that doesn't make good decisions. And so yeah, if you're a fan, I think of pinball games, but also chaotic survivor games, anything that's cute on the surface but actually has a lot of anger and depth underneath, I think Cats vs Cthulhu will be a decent one for you to take a look at. It's out now. Higher Plane Games is part of the Higher Plane Network, a completely independent media outlet supported by people like you. The goal is to create the best possible content that cultivates a richer indie scene for games as well as music and entertainment. To find out more and to get involved, visit patreon.com/higherplane-network. Your support makes all the difference, and in return you'll gain access to bonus content and downloads. Thank you for watching.